You ever go through something that completely changes the way that you see people? Not because it destroyed you, but because it finally forced you to stop lying to yourself? That was a point that I had found myself about 5 years ago. And by that point in my life, everything around me looked unstable. The relationship I fought so hard to hold together was collapsing. The apartment that we had together honestly didn't feel like home anymore. The peace was gone, and honestly, so was I. And what made all of that worse was that I couldn't fully move on. Because even after the breakup, we were still living together. And if you've ever been through something like that, you know how mentally exhausting it is. In that situation, you're trying to heal from somebody while still waking up and seeing them every day. Trying to detach emotionally while still hearing them laugh in the other room. Trying to rebuild your mind while the environment constantly drags you backwards. That situation started changing me. And in the beginning, it was kind of for the worst, because I became a lot more angry, restless, and emotionally unstable. And I don't say that because I was some form of a monster, but I do say that because I was carrying around a lot of unresolved pain that I didn't know how to process correctly. And that's one thing that I have learned about pain over the years, is if you don't heal it, it eventually controls how you talk, how you react, how you think, and how you treat people. And a lot of men never realize that. They think being emotionally shut down means that they're strong, but most of the time they're just wounded. And wounded people eventually bleed on to everyone around them. And that was what happened to me. I was trying to hold myself together while silently falling apart on the inside. But somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, God started waking me up. Not at once, but slowly, painfully, and intentionally. And he helped me start realizing that I had spent years chasing validation from relationships instead of actually building a relationship with myself. I wanted love so badly that I ignored all the red flags, all the manipulation, all the emotional distance, and all the disrespect, simply because I did not want to lose people. And when you're afraid to lose people, you'll tolerate things you should walk away from. And that realization honestly hit me hard, because for the first time it forced me to stop blaming everybody else, and it forced me to ask myself a difficult question. Why do I keep ending up in these situations? And that question changed my entire life. Because a lot of the healing really began when I stopped asking, why did this happen to me? And started asking what inside of me allowed this to continue. And that's a brutal question, but it's necessary. And I'm not saying I was perfect. If anything, I was far from it. I had the anger issues, the walls, the pride, the immaturity, and the trauma that I never dealt with. But I also started realizing that two things can be true at once. You can acknowledge your own flaws without excusing the damage someone else caused you. A lot of people struggle with that balance. They either blame themselves for everything or blame the other person for everything. Real growth happens when you learn to see both clearly. And once I started seeing clearly, I started changing. I stopped obsessing over trying to save those relationships that were already dead. I stopped chasing people who only wanted me when it benefited them. And I stopped begging for effort from people who had already emotionally checked out. And instead, I started rebuilding myself. I went back to work. I started focusing on discipline again. I started reconnecting with my faith. And I started spending more time alone. Not isolated, refined. There's a difference. Isolation destroys you. Refinement transforms you. And sometimes God will remove people from your life because they were distracting you from becoming who you were really supposed to be. And that's something that I honestly didn't understand back then. At the time, I thought losing people meant that I had failed. Now I realize some people leave because their role in your life has expired. Not everybody is meant to walk with you forever. Some people are lessons. Others are warnings. Others are mirrors, and some are temporary chapters that prepare you for your future. But if you keep trying to resurrect dead relationships, you delay your own healing. And that season of my life taught me something else too. And this was something I talked about in a previous video, that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness is when you feel empty. Solitude is when you finally start hearing yourself think again. And for the first time in years, I actually started hearing myself. I started asking, what kind of man do I want to become? What kind of future do I want? And what kind of life am I building? Because deep down, I knew I wanted more than chaos. I wanted peace, purpose, stability, God, and growth. And the scary thing is, sometimes growth requires walking away from people you once thought you couldn't live without. And I know that can be hard, especially when you've built emotional attachments to dysfunction. A lot of us don't realize we became addicted to emotional chaos because it feels familiar. And familiar doesn't always mean healthy. And that's a lesson that I had to learn the hard way, but I am extremely thankful for it now. Because everything I went through during that season forced me to become more self-aware. It forced me to confront those childhood wounds, those attachment issues, that fear of abandonment, the need for validation, and the anger that I carried for years. And honestly, that journey still hasn't stopped. Healing isn't a finish line, it's a process. Some days you do feel strong, and then some days old emotions come back. Some days those memories just hit you unexpectedly. But growth is learning not to let those moments control your life anymore. That's the difference. You stop living emotionally reactive and start living intentionally. And if there's one thing I want people to take away from this chapter of my life, it's this. Just because somebody hurts you doesn't mean that your life is over. Sometimes heartbreak is the thing that introduces you to yourself. Sometimes betrayal exposes what needed to be removed. And sometimes losing everything emotionally becomes the beginning of rebuilding your life correctly. That's what happened to me. And looking back now, I'm grateful that illusion finally broke. Because if it didn't, I might have just stayed stuck forever.